The winds howled across the barren plains of an unnamed alien world, kicking up swirls of violet dust that shimmered faintly under the planet's twin suns. Galen tightened the scarf around his face, squinting against the relentless glare. His hands, rough and weathered, gripped the handle of his scanner, a relic from a bygone era, much like himself. The machine beeped erratically, signaling some sort of anomaly buried beneath the ground. He sighed and knelt down, his knees protesting with a familiar ache. "This better be worth it," he muttered, pulling out a collapsible spade from his pack. The ground here was different, softer, almost warm to the touch, as though it pulsed with its own hidden life. After several minutes of digging, the spade hit something solid. Galen paused, brushing away the remaining dirt to reveal an intricate metallic container, its surface adorned with swirling patterns that seemed to shift under the light. "What in the—" he whispered, leaning closer. The artifact emitted a faint hum, almost like it was alive. His heart pounded with a mix of excitement and caution. He reached out, his fingertips barely grazing the surface when the container responded, clicking open with a soft hiss. A brilliant light erupted from within, forcing Galen to shield his eyes. As the light dimmed, he saw her. She was unlike anything he had ever encountered. A figure of otherworldly beauty, her translucent skin shimmering like crystal under the suns. Her eyes, large and luminous, locked onto his, and for a moment, time seemed to freeze. She floated gently above the open container, her delicate form framed by cascading tendrils of what looked like liquid light. "You have awakened me," she said, her voice a melodic whisper that seemed to bypass sound and resonate directly within his mind. Galen stumbled back, his pulse racing. What are you?" "I am Leora," she replied, her gaze steady and unblinking. "A wish-giver, bound to this relic for countless cycles. By opening it, you have earned a boon. One wish, and it shall be yours." Galen stared at her, his mind struggling to process what was happening. "A wish?" he repeated, skeptical. "Like some kind of genie?" Her head tilted slightly, her expression unreadable. "If that is your frame of reference, then yes. But my power is not limitless, and each wish comes at a cost." The weight of her words settled heavily in the air, but Galen was too caught up in the moment to dwell on them. He laughed, a dry, almost bitter sound. "This is insane. You're saying I can ask for anything?" "Anything within the bounds of my ability," Leora confirmed. She floated closer, her presence strangely calming despite the surreal circumstances. "What is it you desire, Galen?" He blinked in surprise. "How do you know my name?" "It was imprinted upon me the moment you touched the relic. Now speak your wish." Galen hesitated, his mind swirling with possibilities. Wealth, power, youth, all the usual temptations flickered through his thoughts, but they felt hollow. None of it mattered anymore, not after everything he had lost. His life had been a long series of battles, both literal and figurative, leaving him weary and alone. "I want—" He paused, the words catching in his throat. His gaze met Leora's, and for a moment, her radiant form seemed to pulse in time with his heartbeat. "I want to feel alive again." Leora's eyes widened, a flicker of surprise crossing her face. "Alive?" she repeated, her tone soft yet curious. "This is an unusual wish. Most seek tangible gains, not intangible fulfillment." "Well, I'm not like most," Galen replied gruffly, crossing his arms. "Can you do it, or not?" Leora studied him for a long moment, her luminous gaze seeming to pierce through his very soul. Finally, she nodded. "Yes, but to grant such a wish, I must forge a connection with you. A bond that transcends mere words. Are you prepared for this?" Galen frowned, unsure of what she meant but unwilling to back down. "Yeah, do what you have to." Without warning, Leora extended her hand. Her slender fingers, made of shimmering crystal-like material, hovered just inches from his own. "Take my hand, Galen." He hesitated, then reached out. The moment their skin touched, a surge of warmth shot through him, unlike anything he had ever felt. It was as if her very essence was flowing into him, filling the empty spaces he hadn't even realized were there. His breath hitched, and for a brief moment, the world around him seemed to blur and fade, leaving only the two of them in a sea of light. "Do you feel it?" Leora's voice was barely a whisper, yet it resonated with an intensity that made his heart race. "Yeah," he breathed, his voice low and unsteady. "I feel it." Their hands remained entwined, the warmth between them growing more intense. Leora's light began to pulse rhythmically, syncing with the steady beat of his heart. The connection deepened, and Galen felt a strange, almost intoxicating sense of intimacy. It was more than physical, it was emotional, spiritual, as if they were sharing a piece of themselves with each other. Leora's free hand gently brushed against his face, her touch feather-light but charged with energy. "Your wish is not one that can be granted in a single moment," she said softly. "It will take time and trust." Galen swallowed hard, his throat dry. "I'm not going anywhere." A faint smile touched her lips, and for the first time, she seemed almost human. "Neither am I." The bond between them solidified, the energy flowing between their bodies like a river of light. As the suns began to set, casting the alien landscape in hues of gold and crimson, Galen felt a strange sense of hope stirring within him, a feeling he hadn't experienced in years. But deep down, he couldn't shake the nagging question. What exactly had he gotten himself into? The days on the alien planet passed slowly, each one blurring into the next under the relentless gaze of its twin suns. Galen and Leora had set up a makeshift camp near the relic site, a small oasis of calm amidst the desolation. At first, their interactions were awkward, filled with moments of silence as they both adjusted to their unusual partnership. But slowly a rhythm began to form. Leora was unlike anyone Galen had ever known. She moved with an otherworldly grace, her crystalline skin catching the light in mesmerizing patterns. Though her expressions were subtle, her eyes spoke volumes. They reflected curiosity, amusement, and an underlying sadness that tugged at Galen's chest whenever he caught her staring into the horizon. One evening, as the suns dipped below the horizon and the sky filled with twin moons, Galen sat by the campfire, his mind racing with questions. Leora sat across from him, her hands folded delicately in her lap. The firelight cast a warm glow on her translucent form, making her seem almost human. "You've been quiet," Galen said, breaking the silence. "What's on your mind?" Leora tilted her head slightly, her glowing eyes fixed on the flickering flames. "I'm thinking about your wish," she said softly. "It's different from any I've granted before." Galen leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "How so?" "Most who find me seek wealth, power, or to undo past mistakes. Your wish to feel alive is less about changing the world around you and more about transforming what's within." Her gaze shifted to him, and he felt the weight of her scrutiny. "It's a wish that requires more than magic. It demands connection." Galen felt a flicker of discomfort but didn't look away. "And what does that mean for us?" Leora hesitated, then stood and moved closer, sitting beside him. Her presence was cool and soothing, like a gentle breeze on a hot day. She reached out, her hand hovering just above his. "It means we must share more than words. Are you willing to trust me, Galen?" He nodded, his throat tightening. "I'm here, aren't I?" Leora smiled faintly and placed her hand over his. The contact was electric, sending a ripple of warmth up his arm. She leaned in slightly, her voice barely above a whisper. "Close your eyes." Galen obeyed, letting the world around him fade. He felt Leora's other hand gently rest against his chest, her touch light but deliberate. His heart quickened under her palm, and he could feel the pulse of her energy syncing with his own. It was an intimate sensation, one that made him acutely aware of every beat of his heart, every breath he took. "Do you feel it?" Leora asked, her voice like a soothing melody. "Yes," Galen murmured, his voice low. "What is it?" "Our connection," she replied. "It's the first step toward granting your wish." Galen opened his eyes, and for a moment, the world seemed different. The colors around him were more vivid, the sounds sharper. Even the air felt charged with a subtle energy. He turned to Leora, who was watching him with a serene expression. "It's like everything's more alive," he said, struggling to find the right words. "Leora nodded. That's the essence of what you seek. But this is only the beginning. The more we share, the deeper the connection will grow." They sat in silence for a while, the fire crackling softly between them. Galen's thoughts were a whirlwind of emotions: curiosity, apprehension, and a growing sense of closeness to Leora. He had spent so many years alone, building walls around himself, and now those walls were beginning to crumble. The next day, Leora suggested they explore the surrounding area. She explained that movement and shared experiences would help strengthen their bond. As they walked, she spoke of her time within the relic, how she had watched countless stars rise and fall without ever truly living. Her voice was calm, but Galen could sense the underlying loneliness in her words. They came upon a small grove of alien flora, the plants glowing faintly in the dim light. Leora knelt beside one, her delicate fingers brushing against its surface. "These plants react to emotion," she explained. "Touch them with intent, and they will reflect your feelings." Galen crouched beside her, watching as the plant under her touch began to glow with a soft, golden light. "What's it showing now?" "Curiosity," Leora said, glancing at him. "Now you try." He reached out hesitantly, his calloused hand resting on one of the leaves. First, nothing happened, but as he focused on the moment, on Leora's presence, on the strange beauty of the grove, the plant began to emit a faint, warm glow. Leora smiled, a genuine warmth in her expression. "You're opening yourself up. That's good." They spent hours in the grove, exploring its wonders. Leora showed him how different plants reacted to their touch, each one revealing a spectrum of emotions. It was a subtle, almost playful form of communication, and for the first time in years, Galen felt a sense of joy he thought he'd lost forever. As the suns began to set, they returned to their camp. Galen was quiet, his mind reflecting on the day's events. Leora seemed content, her glow softer but steady. After they finished their meal, she sat beside him once more, her eyes searching his face. "You're changing, Galen," she said. "I can feel it." He looked at her, the weight of her words sinking in. "I don't know if that's good or bad." "It's good," Leora said firmly. "Change is necessary for growth, and I believe you're ready for the next step." Galen raised an eyebrow. "Next step?" Leora leaned in slightly, her face inches from his. Her eyes held a depth of emotion that made his breath catch. "To truly feel alive, you must be willing to embrace vulnerability. It's the hardest thing for most beings to do, but it's also the most rewarding." Galen swallowed hard, the intensity of her gaze making his heart pound. "And how do we do that?" Leora reached up, her fingers gently brushing against his cheek. "We take it one moment at a time." Their connection deepened in the quiet of the night, the space between them charged with unspoken emotion. Galen felt himself letting go of the fears that had held him back for so long, allowing himself to be present in the moment. And as the moons rose high above them, he knew that his journey with Leora was only just beginning. The nights on the alien world had grown cooler, the air crisp and tinged with the faint, metallic scent of the planet's flora. Galen found himself more attuned to his surroundings than ever before. Every sound, every shift in the light seemed sharper, more vivid. He knew it wasn't just the environment. It was the connection he had forged with Leora. She had become an anchor in this strange, desolate place, her presence both soothing and invigorating. They sat by the campfire again, their usual evening ritual. Leora's glow was softer tonight, her crystalline skin catching the firelight in subtle hues of gold and silver. She seemed more reflective, her gaze distant as she traced patterns in the dirt with her fingers. "You've been quiet today," Galen said, his voice low but filled with curiosity. "Something on your mind?" Leora glanced up, her luminous eyes meeting his. "I've been thinking about the nature of our bond," she replied. "It's growing stronger, but there are still things you don't fully understand about me. and about what granting your wish entails. Galen leaned back, his expression cautious. Then explain it to me. Leora shifted closer, the warmth of her presence more palpable as she settled beside him. My power comes from a finite source, she began. Each wish I grant takes a part of my essence. For simpler wishes, the cost is small, but yours is different. To make you feel alive again requires more than a mere transfer of energy. It demands a deep connection, one that blends our essences. Galen frowned. And what happens if we keep going? What's the cost for you? Leora hesitated, her eyes flickering with a faint, troubled light. The more I give, the more I fade. The weight of her words hit Galen like a punch to the gut. Fade? You mean I could cease to exist? She said softly. But it's not as simple as life and death for my kind. We don't measure existence in the same way humans do. To grant your wish, I willingly risk my essence because I believe in the connection we've formed. It's something I've never experienced before. Galen's jaw tightened, his mind racing. You should have told me this sooner. I didn't want to burden you, Leora said, her tone gentle. But now you need to know. We must move forward carefully. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The fire crackled softly, its warmth a small comfort in the vast, cold night. Galen's thoughts churned, a mix of anger, guilt, and something deeper, something he couldn't quite name. He didn't want to lose Leora, not after everything they'd shared. What happens if we stop? He asked finally, his voice quiet. Leora reached out, her hand brushing against his. The contact sent a familiar warmth coursing through him. But this time, it was tinged with a hint of sadness. The wish will remain unfulfilled. You'll return to the life you had before. Galen shook his head. That's not an option. Leora offered a faint smile, her eyes softening. Then we continue. But we must do so with intention and care. She rose gracefully, extending a hand to him. Come with me. Galen hesitated for only a moment before taking her hand. The warmth of her touch was reassuring, a silent promise that they would face whatever came next together. Leora led him away from the campfire, deeper into the alien landscape. The ground beneath their feet was soft and faintly luminous, the distant stars casting an ethereal glow over the terrain. They stopped at the edge of a small, shimmering pool. The water was unlike anything Galen had ever seen, its surface rippling with a gentle, otherworldly light. Leora knelt by the pool, motioning for him to do the same. This is a place of reflection, she said. A mirror, not just for the physical, but for the essence of who we are. Galen peered into the water, his reflection distorted by the rippling light. Beside him, Leora's reflection seemed to pulse with life, her form a radiant beacon in the stillness. To deepen our bond, Leora continued, we must be completely open with one another. No barriers, no fears. Are you ready for that? Galen swallowed hard, his pulse quickening. I'm not sure I've ever been ready for anything in my life, but if this is what it takes, then yeah, I'm ready. Leora smiled, a genuine warmth that eased some of his tension. She reached out, her hand resting lightly on his chest, just above his heart. Then let us begin. The air around them seemed to hum with energy as Leora closed her eyes, her form glowing brighter. Galen felt a sudden rush of warmth, spreading from her touch and enveloping his entire body. It was a sensation unlike anything he had ever experienced. Intense, yet comforting, as though he were being wrapped in pure light. Focus on your breath, Leora whispered, her voice barely audible over the steady thrum of energy. Feel the rhythm of your heartbeat, and let it guide you. Galen obeyed, his breaths deep and measured. He felt his heartbeat slow, syncing with the gentle pulse of Leora's glow. Their connection deepened, the boundaries between them fading. He could feel her emotions, her memories, and a profound sense of longing that mirrored his own. Leora leaned in, her forehead gently resting against his. The gesture was simple, yet profoundly intimate. Galen closed his eyes, surrendering to the moment. He felt her presence all around him, a warmth that filled the empty spaces within. As the connection solidified, the pool before them began to shimmer more brightly. Images flickered across its surface, fragments of Galen's life, moments of pain and loss interwoven with brief flashes of joy. Leora's memories joined the tapestry, revealing her own struggles and loneliness. "You carry so much," Leora said softly, her voice filled with compassion. "But you don't have to carry it alone anymore." Galen opened his eyes, his gaze meeting hers. "Neither do you." The weight of their shared vulnerabilities hung in the air, but it was no longer a burden. Together, they had found strength in their connection, a bond that transcended the limits of their individual existence. Leora's light dimmed slightly, her breathing shallow. Galen noticed immediately, concern flickering in his eyes. "Leora, are you—" "I'm fine," she said quickly, though her tone lacked conviction. "This is part of the process. Trust me." Galen wasn't convinced, but he nodded, determined to see this through. Whatever the cost, they would face it together. The days following their shared experience at the pool felt different. Charged, as if the world itself had shifted. Galen noticed it first in the smallest things. The way Leora's presence lingered even when she wasn't near, or how his thoughts would drift to her without warning. Their bond was no longer just an abstract connection. It was something tangible, woven into every moment. They spent their days exploring the alien landscape together, discovering hidden groves of glowing flora and crystal formations that hummed softly under their touch. Leora seemed more alive than ever, her energy vibrant, her laughter a rare but precious sound that echoed through the quiet expanse. Galen found himself smiling more, the weight of his past burdens feeling lighter in her company. But as their bond deepened, so too did the moments of intensity between them. One evening, as the twin suns dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and violet, they returned to their camp. The fire crackled softly, casting flickering shadows that danced across Leora's radiant form. Galen sat beside her, the warmth of the fire mingling with the heat that seemed to radiate from her. He had grown accustomed to the strange, comforting sensation of her presence, but tonight it felt different, closer, more intimate. "Today was good," Galen said, breaking the comfortable silence. His voice was quieter than usual, almost hesitant. Leora turned her gaze to him, her luminous eyes reflecting the firelight. "Yes, it was," she agreed, her tone soft. She studied him for a moment, then added, "You seem more at ease." Galen chuckled, the sound low and rough. "My bayam. You've got a way of making things feel less complicated." Leora smiled, a faint but genuine expression that warmed him in ways he couldn't explain. "That's the bond at work. We're learning from each other, growing together." Galen nodded, his gaze dropping to where their hands rested, mere inches apart. The space between them felt charged, as if even the smallest movement would bridge the gap. He hesitated, then slowly reached out, his fingers brushing lightly against hers. Leora's glow intensified slightly at the contact, her light pulsing in rhythm with his touch. She didn't pull away. Instead, she turned her hand over, their palms meeting. The connection was immediate, a surge of warmth and energy that made Galen's breath catch. "Every time we touch," Leora said softly, "our bond grows stronger. Do you feel it?" Galen nodded, his voice low. "Yeah, I feel it." They sat like that for a while, their hands entwined, the silence between them filled with unspoken words. Galen could feel his heartbeat syncing with the gentle pulse of Leora's light, the sensation both calming and exhilarating. "Galen," Leora murmured, her voice drawing his attention. She leaned in slightly, her gaze never leaving his. "There's something else I want to show you." "What is it?" he asked, his curiosity piqued. Leora stood gracefully, her hands still in his, and guided him away from the campfire. They walked in silence, the soft glow of the alien flora lighting their path. Eventually, they reached a small clearing, where the ground shimmered with a faint, golden light. "This place is special," Leora said, her voice barely above a whisper. "It's a nexus of energy, a place where the barriers between worlds are thinner." Galen looked around, taking in the ethereal beauty of the clearing. And what happens here? Leora stepped closer, her gaze steady. It allows for a deeper connection, one that transcends the physical and emotional. But only if we're both willing. Galen's heart pounded in his chest, a mix of anticipation and uncertainty. What do I need to do? Just trust me, Leora said, her voice gentle. She reached out, placing her hands on his shoulders. The touch was light, but it sent a ripple of warmth through him. Slowly, she leaned in, her forehead resting against his. Close your eyes, she whispered. Galen obeyed, his breathing steady as he focused on the warmth of her touch and the steady rhythm of their shared energy. He felt a sudden rush of sensations, memories, emotions, fragments of experiences that weren't his. It was as if he were seeing the world through Leora's eyes, feeling her joys, her sorrows, her hopes. At the same time, he sensed her presence within his own mind, exploring the depths of his thoughts and memories. There was no judgment, only understanding. It was an intimacy unlike anything he had ever known, a merging of their essences that left him breathless. As the connection deepened, Galen felt a profound sense of peace, as if all the pieces of his fragmented life were finally falling into place. He opened his eyes, finding Leora watching him with a soft, radiant smile. Now you see, she said, her voice filled with quiet awe. We are more than just individuals. Together we create something new, something whole. Galen reached up, his hand gently cupping her face. Her light pulsed warmly under his touch, and for a moment, the world around them seemed to fade, leaving only the two of them. I never thought I'd feel this way again, he admitted, his voice barely audible. Like I'm part of something bigger. Leora leaned into his touch, her eyes closing briefly. You've always been more than you realized, Galen. You just needed someone to show you. The distance between them closed as Galen leaned in, his lips brushing softly against hers. The kiss was gentle at first, a tentative exploration of the bond they shared. But as their connection deepened, the kiss grew more passionate, a shared expression of the emotions that had been building between them. When they finally pulled apart, both were breathless, their eyes locked in a silent understanding. They didn't need words. Their bond spoke for them, a language of light and energy that transcended anything Galen had ever known. As they stood in the clearing, the golden light around them pulsing gently, Galen felt a sense of purpose he hadn't felt in years. He didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in a long time, he was ready to face it, together with Leora. The days following their kiss brought a newfound closeness between Galen and Leora, but with it came an unspoken tension. Their bond had deepened in ways neither of them could fully explain, yet the cost of that bond lingered at the edge of their thoughts. Leora's light had dimmed slightly after their time in the clearing, a subtle but undeniable shift that Galen couldn't ignore. They sat together one evening, their campfire crackling softly. Leora leaned against a smooth outcropping of stone, her luminous form bathed in the warm glow of the flames. Galen watched her in silence, his brow furrowed with concern. She seemed more serene than usual, her eyes half closed as if lost in thought. You've been quieter lately, Galen said, breaking the stillness. Leora opened her eyes, her gaze meeting his. I've just been reflecting, she replied softly. The bond we share is unlike anything I've ever experienced. Galen nodded, though the weight in her voice didn't escape him. It's not just that, is it? He pressed gently. You're holding something back. Leora hesitated, her glow flickering faintly. She sat up straighter, her expression solemn. There's something I need to tell you, she admitted. Our connection, while beautiful, is also dangerous. Galen's chest tightened. Dangerous how? The deeper our bond grows, the more of my essence I give, Leora explained. It's not just my light that dims. It's my life force. Each moment we share brings you closer to your wish, but it also brings me closer to my end. Galen felt a surge of anger and guilt. Why didn't you tell me sooner? He demanded, his voice rough. I would've. Would've what? Leora interrupted gently. Stopped? Turned away from the connection we've built. She shook her head, her expression softening. I didn't tell you because I made my choice the moment I granted your wish. I accepted the risk. That doesn't mean I'm okay with it, Galen said, his voice quieter now. He ran a hand through his hair, frustration evident in his movements. There has to be another way. Leora reached out, her fingers brushing lightly against his arm. The touch was soothing, yet it carried a weight of finality. There may be a way to slow the process, she said, but it will require even greater trust between us. Galen's gaze hardened with resolve. Whatever it takes, he said firmly. We'll figure this out together. Leora nodded, though her eyes betrayed a flicker of doubt. There's a ritual, she explained. It involves merging our energies completely. If we succeed, it could stabilize our bond and preserve my essence longer. But it's risky. If we're not perfectly in sync, the ritual could harm us both. Galen didn't hesitate. Then we'll make sure we're in sync. Leora's smile was faint but genuine. Your determination is admirable, Galen. But this won't be easy. They spent the next few days preparing for the ritual, focusing on strengthening their connection. Leora guided Galen through exercises meant to align their energies, meditative practices, shared memories, and moments of quiet intimacy. Each night, they sat close by the fire, their hands entwined as they exchanged stories of their pasts. One evening, as they sat in companionable silence, Leora placed her hand over Galen's heart. You've carried so much pain, she said softly, but you've also shown incredible resilience. That strength will guide us through this. Galen covered her hand with his own, his eyes searching hers. And you've shown me what it means to truly connect with someone, he replied. I'm not letting you fade away, Leora. The time for the ritual came sooner than either of them expected. They returned to the clearing where the nexus of energy lay, the golden light shimmering faintly beneath their feet. Leora knelt at the center, motioning for Galen to join her. Are you ready? She asked, her voice calm but serious. Galen nodded, his resolve unwavering. I'm with you. Leora closed her eyes, her hands resting lightly on her knees. Galen mirrored her, focusing on the steady rhythm of his breath. Slowly, the energy around them began to hum, a low, resonant vibration that grew in intensity. The golden light beneath them pulsed, matching the synchronized beats of their hearts. Focus on our connection, Leora instructed, her voice steady. Let go of everything else. Galen did as she said, allowing his thoughts to drift away until all that remained was the warmth of Leora's presence. He could feel her energy intertwining with his, a gentle but powerful current that flowed between them. As the ritual deepened, their surroundings seemed to fade, leaving only the two of them enveloped in a cocoon of light. Galen felt a surge of emotion, love, fear, hope, all blending together in a potent mix. Leora's light grew brighter, her essence radiating with renewed strength. But then, a sudden jolt of energy disrupted their harmony. Leora's glow flickered, and her breath hitched. Galen's eyes snapped open, his heart racing. Leora, I'm fine, she said quickly, though her voice was strained. We're close. Just hold on. Galen tightened his grip on her hands, his determination unwavering. He closed his eyes again, focusing on the connection they shared. Slowly, their energies began to realign, the disruption smoothing into a steady flow. The light around them intensified, bathing the clearing in a brilliant golden glow. Galen felt a surge of warmth, a profound sense of unity that left him breathless. It was as if their very souls had merged, creating something new and powerful. When the light finally began to fade, they sat in silence, their breaths coming in unsteady gasps. Leora's glow was steady once more, her essence seemingly restored. It worked, she said softly, a note of relief in her voice. Galen reached out, his hand brushing gently against her cheek. You're still here, he said, his voice filled with quiet awe. Leora leaned into his touch, her eyes shining with gratitude. Thanks to you. Though the ritual had bought them time, They both knew their journey was far from over. But for now, they allowed themselves a moment of peace, their bond stronger than ever before. The days following the ritual were marked by a quiet intensity between Galen and Leora. Their connection had deepened in ways neither could fully articulate, and yet, beneath the surface, a lingering unease remained. The ritual had succeeded in stabilizing Leora's essence, but Galen knew the reprieve was temporary. Every moment they shared carried a weight that neither dared to acknowledge outright. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and bathed the alien landscape in twilight, Galen found himself watching Leora. She stood at the edge of the camp, her translucent form glowing softly in the fading light. The way she moved, the quiet grace in her every gesture, drew him in. She was both a mystery and a comfort, a paradox that had become central to his existence. Leora turned, sensing his gaze. She offered a small smile, her eyes filled with a warmth that seemed to pierce through the growing darkness. "You're staring again," she said, her voice carrying a hint of teasing. Galen shrugged, a faint smirk tugging at his lips. "Can't help it. You've got a way of catching the light." Leora stepped closer, her presence bringing a gentle warmth that Galen had come to crave. She sat beside him by the fire, their shoulders almost touching. For a while, they simply sat in silence, the crackling flames filling the quiet between them. "There's something I've been meaning to ask," Galen said finally, his tone thoughtful. "Back during the ritual, when things went sideways for a moment, what happened?" Leora's smile faded slightly, and she glanced down at her hands, which rested lightly in her lap. "Our energies weren't perfectly aligned at first," she admitted. "It's not uncommon in such rituals, but it can be dangerous. For a moment, I felt myself slipping away." Galen's chest tightened. "And you didn't tell me?" "I didn't want to worry you," Leora said gently. "I knew we could realign if we stayed focused. And we did." Galen sighed, running a hand through his hair. "You've got a habit of not telling me when things are serious." Leora reached out, her fingers brushing lightly against his arm. The touch was soothing, yet it carried an unspoken apology. "I'm learning," she said softly. "This connection we share, it's new for me too." Galen nodded, his expression softening. "We'll figure it out together." Leora's hand lingered for a moment longer before she withdrew it, her gaze thoughtful. "There's something else I've been thinking about," she said. "Our bond has given us incredible strength, but it's also made us vulnerable. The deeper we connect, the more intertwined our fates become." "What do you mean?" Galen asked, his brow furrowing. "If something were to happen to one of us," Leora explained, "the other would feel the impact. It's a risk, but it also makes our connection powerful. Together, we can face challenges that would be impossible alone." Galen absorbed her words, the weight of them settling heavily on his shoulders. "So, we're bound in more ways than one," he said, his voice low. Leora nodded, her expression solemn. "Yes, but I believe that bond is what will see us through." Their conversation was interrupted by a sudden shift in the air. A faint hum, almost imperceptible, echoed through the clearing. Leora stiffened, her glow flickering slightly as she stood, her eyes scanning the horizon. "What is it?" Galen asked, rising to his feet. Leora's expression was tense. "Something's coming," she said. "An energy disturbance. I can feel it." Galen's hand instinctively went to his weapon, a relic of his past life as a soldier. He hadn't needed it in weeks, but the feel of it in his grip was a familiar comfort. "Do you think it's dangerous?" "I'm not sure," Leora admitted, "but we should be prepared." They moved quickly, extinguishing the fire and gathering their supplies. The hum grew louder, a low, resonant vibration that seemed to come from all around them. As the sky darkened, a faint, eerie light appeared on the horizon, growing steadily brighter. Galen and Leora stood side by side, their gazes fixed on the approaching glow. It wasn't long before the source of the disturbance became clear. A massive, crystalline structure, floating above the ground and pulsing with an otherworldly energy. It moved slowly, its surface shimmering like a living being. Leora's eyes widened, a mixture of awe and fear in her expression. "It's a sentinel," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "A sentinelle. Galen Nehoid. What's it doing here?" "They guard places of great power," Leora explained. "I didn't think any still existed." The sentinel hovered closer, its presence imposing. Galen tightened his grip on his weapon, his instincts on high alert. "Do we run? Or do we stand our ground?" Leora hesitated, her gaze fixed on the sentinel. "We stay," she said finally. "If it senses our bond, it may see us as a threat. But if we show no aggression, it might pass us by." They stood motionless as the sentinel approached, its crystalline surface glowing with a mesmerizing array of colors. The hum of its energy grew louder, vibrating through the ground beneath their feet. Galen's pulse quickened, but he forced himself to stay calm, trusting Leora's judgment. The sentinel came to a stop a few meters away, its towering form casting a shimmering light over them. For a moment, it simply hovered, its surface shifting and pulsing. Then, without warning, a beam of light shot out from its core, enveloping Galen and Leora. Galen tensed, his heart racing, but Leora placed a reassuring hand on his arm. "It's scanning us," she said. "Stay still." The light intensified, and Galen felt a strange, tingling sensation course through his body. It wasn't painful, but it was deeply unsettling. He glanced at Leora, who stood calm and resolute, her glow steady. After what felt like an eternity, the beam of light retracted, and the sentinel began to move again, drifting slowly away. The hum of its energy faded as it disappeared into the distance, leaving Galen and Leora alone once more. Galen let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. "What the hell was that?" "A test," Leora said quietly, "and we passed." They stood in silence for a moment, the weight of the encounter settling over them. Galen reached out, his hand finding Leora's. She squeezed it gently, her glow warm and steady. "Whatever comes next," Galen said, his voice firm, "we'll face it together." Leora nodded, her eyes filled with quiet determination. Together, the sentinel's departure left the air heavy with tension, the hum of its energy still resonating faintly in Galen's ears. He and Leora stood in the clearing, their hands still entwined as if anchoring each other in the aftermath. The alien world around them was silent, save for the faint rustling of the glowing flora in the breeze. Galen exhaled slowly, his grip on Leora's hand tightening. "That was too close," he muttered, his voice low but edged with relief. "What if it had decided we were a threat?" Leora's glow pulsed softly, her expression calm but thoughtful. "It could sense our bond," she said. "That's why it scanned us. Sentinels seek out energy anomalies, and what we share is unique." Galen frowned, his mind racing. "Unique enough to draw more of them?" "It's possible," Leora admitted. "But the fact that it didn't attack means it recognized our bond as something harmonious, not destructive." Galen shook his head, his eyes narrowing as he stared at the spot where the sentinel had vanished. "We can't keep relying on luck. If more of those things show up..." Leora placed a hand on his arm, her touch soothing. "We'll adapt," she said gently. "We always do." Galen looked at her, his expression softening. Despite everything, Leora remained a steady presence, her resolve unwavering. He nodded, drawing strength from her calm. "You're right," he said, "but we need to be ready for whatever comes next." The days that followed were a blur of preparation. Galen and Leora worked tirelessly to fortify their camp, gathering supplies and refining their ability to synchronize their energies on command. They practiced often, their sessions growing more intense as they pushed their connection to new limits. One evening, after a particularly grueling session, they sat by the fire, both of them visibly drained. Leora's glow was faint, her breathing slow and measured. Galen watched her carefully, concern etched on his face. "You're pushing yourself too hard," he said, his voice low but firm. "We should take a break." Leora shook her head, offering a faint smile. I'm fine, she replied. We need to be prepared. You're not fine, Galen countered, leaning forward. I can feel it. Every time we push our bond like this, it takes a toll on you. Leora's gaze softened, and she reached out, her hand resting lightly on his. You're right, she admitted, but I don't want to waste the time we have. Every moment we share is worth the risk. Galen's chest tightened at her words. He reached up, gently brushing a strand of her glowing hair away from her face. Leora, he said quietly, his voice thick with emotion. I don't want to lose you. She leaned into his touch, her eyes closing briefly. You won't, she whispered. As long as we're together, we'll find a way. Their closeness lingered, the firelight casting flickering shadows around them. Galen leaned in, his forehead resting against hers, their breaths mingling in the cool night air. It was a quiet, intimate moment, filled with unspoken promises. The next day brought a renewed sense of urgency. Galen and Leora ventured deeper into the alien landscape, searching for any signs of the Sentinel's return or other potential threats. The terrain grew more treacherous, with jagged rock formations and dense clusters of luminescent plants that pulsed softly underfoot. As they navigated the challenging terrain, Galen couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. His instincts, honed from years of survival, kept him on edge. He glanced at Leora, who moved with her usual grace, her glow steady despite the rugged surroundings. Do you feel that? Galen asked, his voice low. Leora paused, her eyes narrowing as she focused on their surroundings. Yes, she said after a moment. There's a disturbance nearby. They pressed on, their senses heightened. The hum of energy grew stronger as they approached a narrow gorge, the walls lined with crystalline growths that pulsed with an eerie light. At the center of the gorge stood another sentinel, its massive form radiating power. Galen's grip on his weapon tightened. Another one, he muttered. We need to be careful. Leora nodded, her expression serious. It hasn't noticed us yet, she said. But if it does, we need to be ready. As they edged closer, the sentinel's energy field began to fluctuate, the pulsing light intensifying. Leora closed her eyes, reaching out with her senses. It's drawing power from the crystals, she said. It's using them to amplify its reach. Galen's jaw clenched. We can't let it finish whatever it's doing, he said. If it calls for reinforcements, we'll stop it, Leora said firmly. Together, they moved quickly, positioning themselves within the cover of the gorge's rocky outcroppings. Leora's glow dimmed as she concentrated, her hands raised as she began to channel her energy. Galen stood beside her, his weapon at the ready, his focus sharp. The sentinel's light flared as it detected their presence, its massive form shifting as it prepared to engage. A beam of energy shot out, narrowly missing them as they dodged to the side. Now, Leora called, her voice steady despite the chaos. Galen fired, his shots aimed at the crystalline nodes lining the sentinel's frame. The energy blast disrupted its power flow, causing it to falter. Leora seized the opportunity, unleashing a concentrated burst of her energy toward the sentinel's core. The impact was immediate. The sentinel's form shuddered, its light flickering erratically before it collapsed in a burst of radiant energy. The crystals in the gorge dimmed, their power drained as the sentinel's presence faded. Galen lowered his weapon, his breathing heavy. We did it, he said, his voice laced with relief. Leora nodded, though her glow was faint, her exhaustion evident. For now, she said softly. But there may be more. They made their way out of the gorge, the weight of their victory tempered by the knowledge that their challenges were far from over. As they returned to their camp, the bond between them felt stronger than ever, a beacon of hope in an uncertain world. That night, as they sat by the fire, Galen reached for Leora's hand. Whatever happens, he said, his voice steady, we'll face it together. Leora's gaze met his, her eyes filled with quiet determination. Together, she agreed, their connection unwavering. The battle in the gorge had taken a toll on both Galen and Leora. The Sentinel's collapse left them victorious but drained, their energies dangerously low. As they returned to their camp under a sky streaked with alien constellations, the quiet between them spoke louder than words. Leora's glow had dimmed to a faint pulse, her usual grace replaced by a noticeable weariness. Galen helped her settle near the fire, his hand steady despite the worry etched into his face. "You're pushing yourself too hard," he said, his voice gruff but gentle. "You need to rest." Leora shook her head, her eyes meeting his with quiet determination. "There's no time for rest," she replied softly. "The Sentinels are drawn to the energy we've created. If we stop now, more will come." Galen crouched beside her, his brow furrowed. "And what happens if you burn out before we even get a chance to fight again?" he countered. "This bond of ours, it's powerful, but it's taking too much from you." Leora reached out, her hand finding his. The contact sent a familiar warmth through him, though it was weaker than before. "This bond is our greatest strength," she said. "It's the only thing keeping us alive." Galen sighed, his resolve softening under her gaze. He could feel the truth in her words. Their connection wasn't just a lifeline. It was a source of hope in a world that seemed intent on tearing them apart. But the cost of maintaining it was one they could no longer ignore. As the fire crackled softly between them, Leora's expression shifted, her gaze turning thoughtful. "There's one more thing we can try," she said after a moment. "It's risky, but it could stabilize our bond and give us the strength we need to face what's coming." Galen's eyes narrowed. "What kind of risk are we talking about?" "The ritual we performed before," Leora explained, "was only the first step. There's a deeper connection we can forge, one that merges our essences completely. If it works, it will stabilize my energy and strengthen us both. But if it fails..." She didn't need to finish. Galen knew what was at stake. He studied her for a long moment, the weight of her words settling over him. "And you're sure this is the only way?" Leora nodded. "Yes, but it has to be a choice we make together." Galen's jaw tightened as he considered her words. The thought of losing her, of losing the bond they had fought so hard to build, was almost unbearable. But the alternative was even worse. Slowly he reached out, his hand covering hers. "Then we do it," he said firmly. "Together." Leora's lips curved into a faint smile, her glow pulsing softly in response. "Together," she echoed. That night, under the light of twin moons, they prepared for the final ritual. The clearing where they had first strengthened their bond was now bathed in a serene, otherworldly glow, the golden light beneath their feet pulsing in time with their heartbeats. They knelt opposite each other, their hands intertwined, their eyes locked in a shared resolve. Leora began to chant softly, her voice a melodic whisper that seemed to resonate with the very fabric of the world around them. Galen closed his eyes, focusing on the steady rhythm of her words, the warmth of her touch. He could feel their energies beginning to align, a powerful current flowing between them. As the ritual deepened, the light around them intensified, enveloping them in a cocoon of radiant energy. Galen felt a surge of emotions: love, fear, hope, all blending into a single, overwhelming sensation. He could feel Leora's essence merging with his, their thoughts and feelings intertwining in a way that transcended words. "Stay with me," Leora whispered, her voice barely audible over the hum of energy. "I'm here," Galen replied, his grip on her hands tightening. "I'm not going anywhere." The connection between them grew stronger, their energies fusing into a single, harmonious flow. Galen could feel Leora's presence within him, her light filling the empty spaces he hadn't realized were there. It was an intimacy unlike anything he had ever known, a merging of souls that left him breathless. But then, a sudden jolt of energy disrupted the harmony. Leora's glow flickered, her expression tightening as she struggled to maintain the connection. "Something's wrong," she said, her voice strained. "The energy is unstable." Galen's heart pounded. "What do we do?" Leora's gaze met his, determination flashing in her eyes. "Trust me," she said. "Let go of your fear. Focus on our bond." Galen swallowed hard, his instincts screaming at him to fight, to resist. but he forced himself to trust her, to surrender to the connection they shared. He closed his eyes, focusing on the warmth of her presence, the steady pulse of their merged energy. Slowly, the instability began to subside, the flow of energy smoothing into a steady rhythm. Leora's glow brightened once more, her expression softening as the ritual reached its climax. The light around them surged, filling the clearing with a brilliant radiance before gradually fading. When the light finally dimmed, they were left sitting in the quiet glow of the clearing, their hands still entwined. Galen opened his eyes, his breathing unsteady. "Did it work?" he asked, his voice rough. Leora smiled, her glow steady and strong. "Yes," she said softly. "Our bond is complete." Galen exhaled a shaky breath, relief washing over him. He could feel the difference, the stability in their connection, the renewed strength in Leora's presence. They had done it, but even as they shared a moment of quiet triumph, Galen knew their journey was far from over. The threat of the Sentinels still loomed, and the world around them remained a dangerous place. Yet, for the first time in a long time, he felt a glimmer of hope. Whatever lay ahead, they would face it together. The night was calm after the ritual, the twin moons casting a soft glow over the clearing where Galen and Leora rested. Their bond, now fully merged, pulsed steadily between them, a constant reminder of the journey they had shared. Galen leaned against a smooth rock, his eyes half closed, the fatigue from the ritual still lingering in his limbs. Leora sat beside him, her glow brighter and more stable than it had been in days. For a while, neither of them spoke. The silence was comforting, filled with the unspoken understanding that words could no longer convey. Galen's thoughts drifted to the battles they had fought, the risks they had taken, and the moments of quiet connection that had brought them to this point. Despite the uncertainty of what lay ahead, he felt a rare sense of peace. "It's strange," Leora said softly, breaking the silence. Her voice was calm, yet filled with a quiet awe. "I've spent so much of my existence granting wishes, watching lives change from a distance. But this is the first time I've truly lived." Galen turned his head, his gaze meeting hers. "You've always been more than just a wish giver," he said. "You've got a strength that most people can't even begin to understand." Leora smiled, her light pulsing warmly. "And you've shown me what it means to share that strength," she replied. "To be connected, not just in purpose, but in heart." Galen reached out, his hand resting gently on hers. The warmth of their touch was familiar now, but no less powerful. "I wouldn't have made it this far without you," he said quietly. "You've given me a reason to keep going." Leora's gaze softened, and she leaned closer, her forehead resting lightly against his. "And you've given me something I never thought possible," she whispered. "A connection that goes beyond duty or destiny. Something real." They stayed like that for a while, their shared warmth a quiet refuge in the vastness of the alien world. But the peace was not to last. As dawn approached, the hum of energy in the distance signaled the arrival of a new threat. Galen was the first to sense it. He straightened, his muscles tensing as he scanned the horizon. "Do you hear that?" he asked, his voice low. Leora nodded, her glow dimming slightly as her focus shifted. "Yes," she said. "Another sentinel. It's closer than before." Galen stood, his hand instinctively reaching for his weapon. "We've got to move," he said. "If it finds us here." "It won't," Leora interrupted, rising to her feet. Her expression was calm but determined. "We're ready for this." They packed their camp quickly, their movements efficient and silent. As they moved through the alien terrain, the hum of the approaching sentinel grew louder, its energy signature a stark contrast to the natural rhythms of the world around them. When the sentinel finally came into view, it was larger than the ones they had faced before. Its crystalline form glowed with an intense, shifting light, and the air around it crackled with raw power. Galen felt a familiar surge of adrenaline, his grip tightening on his weapon. "This one's different," he muttered. "Stronger." Leora stepped forward, her glow steady despite the looming threat. It's drawn to the strength of our bond, she said. But that bond is also our greatest weapon. Galen nodded, his trust in her unwavering. Then let's finish this. The sentinel moved toward them, its massive form shifting as it prepared to attack. Beams of energy shot out, striking the ground around them in bursts of light and heat. Galen and Leora moved in perfect sync, their connection guiding their actions with a fluidity that felt almost instinctual. Galen fired at the sentinel's crystalline nodes, each shot disrupting its energy flow and forcing it to recalibrate. Leora channeled her energy, sending powerful waves of light toward the sentinel's core. The combined force of their attacks created a dazzling display, the air around them shimmering with raw energy. The battle was intense, the sentinel's attacks relentless. But Galen and Leora fought with a determination born of their shared bond. They moved as one, their strengths complementing each other in a way that felt both natural and extraordinary. As the sentinel faltered, its energy field flickering, Leora seized the moment. She raised her hands, her glow intensifying as she prepared to unleash a final, concentrated burst of energy. "Now, Galen," she called. Galen fired a precise shot at the sentinel's core, the blast aligning perfectly with Leora's attack. The combined force struck the sentinel with a blinding intensity, its crystalline form shattering in a cascade of light and sound. When the light finally faded, the sentinel was gone, its energy dissipated into the air. Galen and Leora stood together, their breaths heavy but their resolve unshaken. The threat had been neutralized, but the victory felt different this time, more significant, more personal. Galen lowered his weapon, his gaze turning to Leora. "We did it," he said, his voice filled with quiet relief. Leora nodded, her glow steady and bright. "Yes," she said softly, "and we'll be ready for whatever comes next." They returned to their camp as the first rays of dawn lit the horizon. The world around them was quiet once more, but the bond they shared pulsed with a steady strength that filled them with hope. As they sat by the fire, the warmth of their connection a constant presence, Galen knew that their journey was far from over. But for the first time, he felt truly prepared to face whatever challenges lay ahead. Together, they had found a strength that could withstand even the greatest of threats. And together, they would forge a new path in a world that had tried to tear them apart.